All right, joining us this morning is Thaddeus George McCotter, commonly known as Thad McCotter, congressman from Michigan's 11th Congressional District, serving since 2003, a member of the Republican Party, and it was back in July that he announced that he would run for the Republican nomination for president in the 2012 election. And Congressman McCotter joins us this morning from Michigan. Good morning, Congressman. Nice to have you with us. How are you?
Oh, how are you? Thanks for having me on.
Nice to have you with us. Now, you're coming to New Hampshire this week, I understand, correct?
Yes, this weekend. It's a little bit of a state of flux because obviously the president's speech, I'm going to be there on the 8th to hear it. Unfortunately, I don't think we're going to hear a whole lot of anything new from the president.
I wanted to ask you, I don't know if you've seen some of the latest ABC News, Washington Post polls, and the NBC Wall Street Journal polls. We were talking about it just before we got on the air with you this morning. The huge dissatisfaction with not just the president's approval rating, but the Republican congressional leaders' approval ratings as well. I mean, they're very, very high. They're at their worst ever, or the highest level of disapproval ratings and approval ratings. And you know, I wonder what you make of that, obviously. And when we're talking about both sides, there seems to be the American electorate just seems to be totally, you know, upset, teed off, whatever you want to call it, with the way our government is run. People feel we're not going in the right direction. They're not satisfied with the president. They're not satisfied with Congress. So what do you make of all that as a Republican presidential candidate?
Well, I think it mirrors the sense of alienation that many voters have felt for quite some time from institutions which are supposed to serve them. I think you can date it back largely to the start of the recession, and especially the Wall Street bailout, where people were told that there were some people in America that were more important than others and had to be bailed out when they caused the problem of crashing the financial markets. And I think that in the stagnant economy in which we find ourselves and the proposals that are coming forward, the American people aren't finding anything for either the Congress, which is divided between the House being in Republican hands and the Senate being in Democratic hands, and the president, obviously. They're very frustrated at this point in time, and I think that that's reflected in that. And as you know from the Rasmussen polls we've seen, more Americans believe that our best days are behind us, which I think is probably the most disquieting poll result that we've seen so far.
That is a very sad commentary. You know, it's supposed to be our best days, obviously, are ahead of us, hopefully. You've joined a very crowded field of Republican presidential candidates. How do you find yourself standing out among those?
Well, I think that what I'm finding is it's obviously difficult without national media coverage, but that's something you have to continue to push for and try to get so that you can get in the debates and bring the issues forward. Obviously, we saw Mr. Bernanke talk about obliquely at Jackson Hole. The problem is we have debt overhangs on the balance sheets of the failed Wall Street bailout banks. We have that debt overhang also in the housing market, and obviously the debt problems that we have in the United States government. And these are things that have to be addressed. Now, many Republicans address the debt problems in the government, which is appropriate. But what we're not seeing is an address on how to get the banks to start recapitalizing and end the credit contraction, which is further depressing this economy in many ways, similar to what Japan experienced in the 1990s.
Why do you, I mean, when you look at it, I want to invite our listeners to call in as well at 742-1270 and toll-free 1-888-441 WTSN. Michigan Congressman Thad McCotter, also an announced Republican presidential candidate, with us this morning for a few minutes on Open Mic. And he's planning to come to the state sometime this weekend if things go the way he'd like them to go. Why do you... I just lost my train of thought there for a second, but I guess I wanted to ask you, I mean, a lot of people are calling you a long shot. You need to build up name recognition. You need to build up some money. How difficult or how easy do you think that will be for you to get involved with these debates, to get invited to these debates, to be able to have people hear you and to hear your views? I mean, obviously, this show is important to be on. Obviously, we get to know you a little bit more, but obviously, you got to get into those debates and you got to sort of break the mold there. I mean, are you satisfied the way the process of getting into the debates is made, or do you feel totally left out? Obviously, because you don't get the opportunity.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. It is a long shot. I take it that way, but it also means to get the message out. And I think that one of the things that's frustrating is the media will promote candidates, and then they will use selective criteria, including poll results, many of which I'm not even listed on, as how you get into the debates, which is kind of a catch-22. Where's Joseph Heller when you need him? If you have to poll a certain amount on a debate and you're not on the poll, I think it's rather difficult to meet the criteria. We believe that we met the criteria for the Ames straw poll debate. Even Fox's own internal polls had me at 1%, the requisite threshold to get in there, but they rejected our data. Then we had the situation which is going to happen at the Reagan Ranch, or Reagan Library, whereby NBC selected certain polls that they wanted, only 1/4 of which I was even listed on. And so, you just keep pushing away. The beauty of New Hampshire, the beauty of Iowa, is the voters take their roles seriously in the nominating process, and they expect you to come to them and explain what you want to do, and then they'll consider it. I think that's what's the opportunity to get the message in front of people and to try to start driving up some numbers.
What's the real key for you as far as the most important issue to you in this particular campaign? Is it the economy? Is it jobs? Is it the government being too big? Is it the fact that we're, in Iraq, Afghanistan, all over the world? What's important to you that you need to break through with an issue?
Well, I think that generally the most important thing for me is we want Americans to understand that they control the future, not the government, and that if they're allowed to do what they always do best, they're at their best when challenged, our best days will be ahead of us. I truly believe that. In terms of what we have to do, we have to restructure government, not just cut it for the 21st century. We live in a communications revolution that's empowering people every day, and the only institution that seems to try to be impervious to that is the federal government. We need to recapitalize, fix the failed Wall Street bailout banks to have the credit contraction so that we can get the economy moving again. And finally, we have to start dealing with communist China as a strategic threat rival model of governance, which affects both our prosperity and security. Of course, that means we also have to understand that we are a nation at war, which is something that we do not always talk about. Brave men and women overseas that are expanding liberty to defend it here at home. And we have to have a comprehensive approach to foreign policy, which seems to be lacking at the present time.
What is the difference in your campaign? I mean, one of your campaign advisors, and I just read something today actually, one of your campaign advisors said there's a void out there, meaning there's room for a Thad McCotter out there. So are there no other candidates out there that you feel represent you or that you would align up with at all?
Well, I don't worry about that at the present time. I only worry about what I can do by putting out the message. And again, a comprehensive approach to all the problems we face, starting with the premise that the American people will fix them, if allowed to, if big government doesn't continue to suffocate the entrepreneurial genius of the American people. So in terms of advisors, I generally have people back home I listen to, but I follow my own advice, my own counsel before my own positions. Because in the end, the president isn't just someone who decides amongst other competing ideas that come out there. The president has to do a little ideating himself.
742-1270 and the toll-free 1-888-441 WTSN. Michigan Congressman Thad McCotter is our guest this morning. And talking about his presidential campaign today on WTSN's Open Mic. You can follow us on Facebook. You can tweet us a question as well. You can email us at openmic at WTSNAM1270.com. So you don't expect to hear anything new from the president as far as jobs go. If you were giving that speech, well, where would you focus on? What would you sort of tell the American people Thursday night if you were giving that job speech?
Well, first and foremost, I go back to how we have to restructure government for the 21st century. I'm going to be introducing a bill on Social Security reform, which includes personalized accounts, not privatized ones, to help reduce the long-term debt of the system. I think we also have to move towards to implement the reforms that were put forward for patient control and patient choice, both in Medicare and Medicaid, which I believe Medicaid should be starting to get back to the states so they can manage it better and reduce the costs. I think that we should remove Obamacare, obviously, because it's going to not only be a drain on the economy, but it's going to be a problem in terms of it'll raise the cost of health care throughout the country and within personal health care and within the government entitlements of Medicare and Medicaid. I think we have to have tax relief for corporations to get them back down to paying more of a flat rate that's competitive in the world, closing loopholes and leaving it revenue neutral. I think we have to make sure that the Bush tax relief remains in place after set to expire so that we don't hurt the economy and hurt people who are struggling in a very difficult period of time economically. I think we have to have regulatory reform, including stopping the EPA from acting as if it can do whatever it wants, regardless of statutory authority. delegated by Congress. I think we have to have an all-of-the-above energy strategy. But first and foremost, if we do all that, we still have got to fix the crux of the problem, which is the failed Wall Street bailout banks and the credit contraction. If you do not do that, all the other reforms are going to be impaired and are going to be unable to move the economy forward, certainly not going to be able to move it forward at the pace in which is necessary to meet the people coming into the labor market, let alone the people who are currently outside of it.
1-888-441-9876. Michigan Congressman Thad McCotter, our guest for a few more moments here on WTSN's Open Mic. If you have a comment or a question for the congressman, he is running for president on the Republican side and looking for support here in the state of New Hampshire, also in the state of Iowa as well. The first caucuses and the first in the nation presidential primary, which we aren't quite sure when it will be, but probably sometime late January, early February. That's what we are estimating or theorizing. It all depends when Secretary of State Bill Gardner decides to run the presidential primary here in the state. How do you get people to get back with the government and say, how do you get people to sort of believe in the government again? Because, based on these polls that we initially talked about this morning, the Wall Street Journal poll and the Washington Post poll from ABC and NBC, that Americans are just fed up with what's happening, obviously. They don't like what's going on. But how do you get people to get back to say you as a leader, and for people to trust you as a leader and to think that this guy is going to do the right thing for this country and really believe in that person again?
Well, I think it's kind of the other way around. I think they have to vote, they have to be active, and they are. They're very well attuned to what's going on in the country, even if they're disaffected from what's happening in Washington. So you have to get Washington to believe in the American people. And I think that that's the first step. I don't think that the people are wrong necessarily in believing that there are people in Washington or on Wall Street or elsewhere that believe that they can manage the American people. And that's not what the American people want. They want people who believe in them. They want people who do not try to increase the size and scope of government to control more of their own decisions because, as we've discussed quickly, again, we're living in a period of a communications revolution. We're on a laptop. You can communicate around the world. You can purchase a good or service around the world. You're getting sources of information from wherever you want. You're no longer bound by a handful of networks or newspapers. And so while you're moving towards self-empowerment, personal decision-making in all those realms, what you're finding, unfortunately, is the government still lagging behind, thinking that it can take your decisions and your property and centralize it in Washington within a massive bureaucracy.
Right.
So to me, it's going to take the government actually trusting people and recognizing the changing times in which we live and adapting to it. That's what has to happen. I don't think it's anything on the part of the American people. Except
your thoughts on the Tea Party movement and what they represent to this country?
Well, I think the Tea Party movement's call for limited government, the call for reductions in government expenditures because of the national debt and the trillions that we're leaving for our children to clean up behind us. I think it's been helpful. Again, I'm running as a Republican for the Republican nomination. I'm happy to receive the support of anybody who marches beneath that banner or beside it. As for Mr. Rollins, that's not something I'm privy to. That's a different campaign, and I'll let the Bachmann campaign talk about that and explain it if they care to.
All right. We just have about a minute to go here, Congressman, and your thoughts on coming back to the state and making a connection with the voters here. Obviously, it's very important to you to get your campaign off and running with voters in New Hampshire, and how do you make that happen?
Well, you go talk to groups, you talk to individuals, you go see the sovereign American people that live in New Hampshire. They're going to make that determination. And the thing that I like about New Hampshire, especially, same in Iowa, is it's a productive state. It's a state that understands it can't merely have an economy that consumes wealth, borrows wealth, and ships it around. We have to actually make things and sell them. And that's why I feel particularly a kinship with the people of New Hampshire as I come out of Detroit.
All right, Michigan Congressman Thad McCotter, thank you for spending some time. We'll get you back into the studio here when you make some more return visits to the state. We do appreciate your time this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. A few minutes away from noontime, we'll take a break.